Hey there, my name is Beth Ball. I'm one of the two writers for dndduet.com. And so Jonathan and I are working on a new stream called Tales of Eldura, which is a rewriting of, or I guess a duet adaptation and partial rewriting of the Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus adventure from Wizards of the Coast. And so we had our session 0 last week, and we just did our first session last night, but I wanted to take a couple minutes to kind of not just recount our first session, the session 0, but also to reflect on it a little bit as a DM in case you're thinking about running this or running another campaign in a one-on-one setting and wanted a little bit of advice, as well as to kind of hear how things go, not just on the front end of things from a DM's perspective, but also on the tail end of things. So after the session, some things to think about and consider. What are the goals of a session 0, for example? So on our blog, no, on our YouTube channel, sorry, this will be on the blog. On our YouTube channel, I uploaded for last week a video of my notes from the session 0 so that you could see some of what I had kind of prepped in advance for the session. So, and we played for a couple of hours based off this page and a half. And I think it's important to not over prep, although that's really easy to say to especially new DMs, but not so easy to figure out how to do until you kind of find your own way through the DMing process. So if you're in an over prepping stage right now, that's okay. But I'm hoping through the process of creating these videos that we can find ways to kind of help you maybe cut down on that a little bit so that you can spend more time prepping the character aspects of a session and not get so worried about maybe the mechanics of it. So for our session 0 of Descent into Avernus, I have talked about this on the blog as well. We decided, or I decided, to move it to our homebrew world of Eldura instead of it taking place on the Sword Coast. I wanted it to be taking place in a world where the characters would be choosing the adventure itself, and that this would have large ramifications for their world as a whole. So maybe if you wanted to be an adventurer, there would be several different options or things that you could do. Staying home and leaving your home, there would be larger stakes for that. And so that's not to say that that can't happen on the Sword Coast and the Forgotten Realms, but that's what we decided to do. And especially thinking about streaming the story, I wanted it to still be, I'm hoping it will still be fresh if you do decide to run the adventure more kind of as written in the book. But I also know that lots of people, or the majority of people, like to work out of homebrew worlds. And so if that's you, or if you want to see some examples of how to personalize this world for yourself, we will be providing all of those things. So my main goal in our session 0 for Avernus for Tales of Eldora was to give Jonathan a chance to get to know his character and to introduce him to the world of the adventure. So, any session 0, I think that those are the really big things that you're trying to do. Open up opportunities for the player to kind of explore their PC, figure out who they are, what they're about, what types of decisions do they lean toward, what are they concerned about. And so, we especially want to create spaces where our players can work on their internal character development and not get so wrapped up in just what's going on externally in the world. And I do think our session was able to achieve that really well. As I'll talk about in a second, there were several opportunities for Garreth to kind of heed the call of adventure that he shied back away from because it wasn't right for his character yet, and he wasn't ready to give up everything that he has and everything that he's known in order to just follow along with these random people who appeared in his path. And so giving the character, as well as the player, but especially giving the character time and the motivation to kind of say yes to the adventure and jump on board is really important. And so, however, you can provide the space for that in your session 0, do that and try to be as flexible as you can because your player is still getting to know their character just like you're still getting to know them. So the session 0 may go in a quite different direction than you anticipated, but that's okay. This is taking place in a different world than we usually play in. Eldora is set in Azuria's past. Azuria is our usual world. So 5,000 years in the past is kind of where we are right now in Eldora, which will let Jonathan continue our adventures in Azuria while I take us through this world of Eldura. So the decisions that the characters are making aren't necessarily going to exactly affect each other. Um, the Another key piece, and you'll see this in lots of the different resources for starting Descent into Avernus, the adventure, while it starts in Baldur's Gate, the main crux and the stakes of the adventure occur in sorry, my dog is cleaning his little feet. Sorry. The main part of the adventure is happening in the city of El Terrell, or in our case, the city of Beacon. And so that's the city that has been pulled into hell, or for us, pulled into the negative plane. And the difficult thing with having a character who's starting in a totally different city, really long ways away, several days travel, even if you have a relatively small world, is how do you get them to care about it? And the kind of method at the beginning of the hardback adventure is that the characters are threatened into getting involved. So this character, Captain Zodge, basically says that if they don't step in and get involved, that he'll have them killed. Um, I want to put my characters in a position as a DM where they are choosing to step into this greater role of power and influence, not because this commander is going to have them murdered, but because they want to, because they see the opportunity for themselves to make a difference. It's a really common trope in fantasy to have characters who are kind of prophesied as being the heroes or chosen as being the heroes. You're the chosen one. But I think it's really important for those chosen ones, and in this case the heroes, to choose themselves and self-select that they want to go on this adventure. So then we're not having to worry quite as much down the line for the character to be continuing to sign on to what they've agreed to. They're motivated, they've had a chance to develop that motivation from the start, and that gives us the space to have the internal and external character development as we go through the story. And that's one of the things that I think is really special about one-on-one play, that it provides lots of opportunities for that internal growth and development. And lots of research into stories and storytelling says that that's what we really care about when we are invested in a story, or we care about characters or kind of what we're reading for. We want to learn lessons. And while we may not need to know how to throw the ring into Mount Doom, for example, we do need to know how to continue to be brave, how to maintain hope, for example. And so that's what we will latch onto in stories. So how to get the PC to care about this other city while potentially still starting the adventure as written where it is. So what we decided to do, and we set this up a little bit before the session zero. So Jonathan's PC, Garrett's son, Patrick, lives in Beacon, and he is right towards the end of his military training. The entire world of Eldora is kind of dominated by this war between um, forces of good and evil functionally. And so Patrick is supposed to come visit his father within a few weeks of kind of finishing his training, going on leave before he gets officially deployed. And so it's around this time that this disaster befalls Beacon. But and this is the other kind of thing that you need to decide as a DM, is how long does it take for the PC to find out what happened, and in what way do they find out? So one school of thought and one set of approaches to this is to, instead of having this really exciting event where the city gets pulled down into the lower planes, instead of that happening off screen and the characters just finding out about it down the line, go ahead and have that happen during the adventure and let the characters witness it. What I decided to do instead is that our character learns about what's happened. And so he does hear a firsthand account from someone else, but he still has the motivation to care about it because this is a thing that's happening to his son. And so that's the direction that we went. You're, of course, free to do whatever you would like, but I'll talk about that in the session one recap video. But I think that that reveal worked really well. Um, So for the session outline, as you can see in the session prep video, I had a relatively modular outline for the adventure between I basically would have a location and a person for Gareth to interact with in that location and a couple of different places around the city. So the and it wasn't really a problem, but the thing that surprised me the most during the session was Gareth's reluctance to jump into these opportunities. So I brought this revolutionary character to his forge to kind of give him the chance to join a revolutionary organization and create weapons that they would then use to overthrow unjust power structures inside of the city. And that was a really interesting moment in our session zero because there's a divide between what Jonathan would do and would want to do and what Gareth would do and would want to do. But those are really important moments as well for the player to get a chance to kind of feel out um, where they are versus where their character is and where their character wants to go. So there were a few times during the session zero where we paused, where he would say, "Okay, am I supposed to be doing this? Is that okay?" And it's especially with just the two of you, it's going to be pretty normal to check in with one another as you go. I think that that's really great. But go ahead and assure the player that yes, the direction that they're going is totally fine. And if you need them to go a particular direction, then maybe try not to make that a choice or try to really obviously steer them in that direction. But as much as possible, we want to be open and give them the space to kind of choose different ways forward. It's hard at the beginning of an adventure because you have a particular path that you're trying to get them to go on. And so it does take some manipulation behind the scenes in advance to get them latched onto those different pieces. So I another thing that came out of that session was Garrett's apprentice Tomas, who I hadn't really written very much for, but Gareth kind of latched onto him as soon as they met, even though Tomas was messing things up in the forge. And that was a really cool thing to kind of see, since Gareth does have a son who's around this character's age, who he's worried about and has been worried about and somewhat estranged from. So it was really neat to see that kind of fatherly side, although in a more professional aspect. But it's clear even from the very beginning that this bothers this character and is something that he wants to work on. And so I'm excited to find more opportunities to kind of bring out that side of Gareth, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the session one recap as well. So for me, the session zero is all about building trust and creating space for character development. So there were times when Gareth didn't want to kind of take the bait and jump into the adventure. That's fine. I want to give him as much of that space as possible. Um, there were instances of testing his willpower and giving him lots of different choices. So another situation that Gareth faced in our first session was his forge being taken by the City Watch because Gareth wouldn't agree to wartime prices for his goods. And so at different times, the city will go into kind of emergency measures. Bye, Buck. Um, and they'll take over some of the forges and different craftspersons in the city if those people won't agree to lower the prices to make it easier for the city to pay for them. And so this was something that I kind of engineered in part. I planned it a little bit before the session, but certainly developed more as the session was happening because I needed a way to kind of push Gareth towards change. Stories are all about change. We need to get the characters moving. We need to get them invested and interested in stepping outside of their normal lives and their comfort zone and into this world that's kind of calling for them to get involved. And then so that was happening, and that's when the revolutionaries, as Gareth's being kind of led away from his forge to be questioned by the city watch, that's when the revolutionaries intervened, carried Gareth off, hid him in a tavern, and they were found by Night Watch members who are kind of a more elite force. And Gareth did manage to escape, and that was we did that combat relatively quickly because again they are level 1, and you will see a longer version of the combat during our session zero, which we did manage to record. I can't wait for you to see. Um, and so a captain of the Night Watch organization named Millicent Legree offered Gareth kind of in exchange for his freedom, and by that I mean in exchange for Gareth for charges not being pressed against Garreth for breaking away from the city guards and the fight that ensued between the guards and the revolutionary organization. She asked him to go to the Elfsong Tavern and meet someone named Ryder, who has important information about what's going on kind of at the larger level of the city. And so Garreth doesn't totally understand what information Ryder has because this particular set of the watch is a little bit more secretive in nature, but that still gave him the opportunity to get involved and decide, okay, I don't want to serve time for this. I do want to step outside of what I'm normally doing. I'm going to put James and Tomas in charge of the forge, and I'm going to go find this writer person so that I can, right now, he wants to get things returned to normal. And he also really wants to find out what's going on in Beacon and with his son. So we have these kind of two primary driving factors that are going to come to a head in session one. And I think that that's really exciting when you're making the character choose between staying the same and sticking in their comfort zone, and then kind of making the change of staying the same so uncomfortable that they then choose to step out of their comfort zone and step into this world of adventure. So I hope that was helpful in terms of your session zeros, and I can't wait for you to see session one, and we'll have another video like this on a session one recap. So thank you so much.